together to talk about all the things we used to do. The laughs, the passions, the little Sebastians, the pits we fell into. And we're putting it all in a podcast. Then we'll send it up into the sky. We're calling it Parks and Recollection. Come on, little podcast, spread your wings and fly.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rollo. This is Parks and Recollection. Recollection. That's my new way of pronouncing it.
What a start! Kicking it off loud.
I know. I have one of those days today, but I always feel great when we get into the episodes and have fun. But I couldn't wake up today. It's like super hot out. Maybe I'm dehydrated. I don't know. I mean, you play hurt though. That's what you do.
I mean, the suffering that you do, the sacrifices you make for the listener, the loyal audience.
That's right.
But I find, again, I don't know about you, but I find that doing the podcast is fun and gives me a little energy. Like afterwards, totally. I feel it's like I don't feel like it's a drain on energy. So hopefully the podcast will psych you up a little bit.
Oh, I'm psyched. I'm very psyched about this one. I'm very psyched. Today we're doing the Stakeout, not to be confused with the great Emilio Esteves movie, Stakeout.
What is the plot of that Emilio movie?
It's a stakeout.
Oh, okay. Well, simply put, that's the log line, right? That's on the poster.
I mean, God, I remember going to the premiere of it. There's a lot of binoculars, I remember. It was kind of like a gritty buddy comedy with those guys. But this is not what we're doing today, though, right?
Instead of Emilio and Richard Dreyfuss, it was it's Tom Haverford, Aziz Ansari, and Leslie Knope, Amy Poehler. So there you go. There you go.
That's right.
We did want to mention, by the way, Louis C.K. appears in this episode, and we want to address the fact that he took actions that hurt a lot of people, and we are not going to just kind of put that aside. We're just, for the purposes of this podcast, we do need to talk about his character, Dave, who's a police officer who's in this episode and in a couple coming up. So we will be mentioning his character in these podcasts just because he's a part of the show and, he has not been excised from these episodes. So we'll discuss him, and that is in no way sort of condoning anything he did in his personal life, but we will be discussing him. Shall we get to the synopsis just so people know what the hell we're talking about?
Yes. Let's do that.
This episode of The Stakeout, Episode 2 of Season 2, first aired September 24th, 2009. Written by the great Rachel Axler and directed by Seth Gordon. And here's a synopsis. Leslie sets up a stakeout with Tom to find out who's growing marijuana in the community garden she put together in the pit. Meanwhile, Anne gets ready for her first date with Mark and asks Leslie if she's okay with it since Leslie used to have feelings for him. Leslie insists she's fine, but eventually spots Anne and Mark leaving for their date and starts spying on them during her stakeout. That's the title of the episode. Later, Leslie and Tom find out Andy has been living in the pit. Back in the Parks Department, Ron Swanson's hernia causes him excruciating pain, which leaves him completely immobile and stuck in his office. One of my favorite stories, B-stories of the show. Eventually, April returns to check on him and wheels Ron out by his office chair and takes him to the hospital. Back at the pit, Leslie and Andy walk off to get fast food, and Tom gets locked out of the van. Anne and Mark return from their date and call the police after they see Tom, assuming him to be a prowler trying to break into the van. Officer Dave arrives and arrests Tom. Leslie, Anne, and Mark go to the police to explain and get Tom out. Dave releases Tom, who thanks Leslie for sticking up for him. The next day, Leslie and Dave go to the garden. Dave assumes Leslie made the whole thing up to spy on Anne and Mark. The episode ends with Dave sharing that he is attracted to Leslie. So it a lot of ups and downs in this episode. A circuitous plot for sure.
And a lot of whipped cream.
A lot of whipped cream. I love that opening where she's you make the best coffee. You make the best coffee, Anne.
I had no idea how much whipped cream Leslie Knope consumed, really, until watching this episode. She consumes, and it made me think of my Indiana whipped cream. You want to hear my Indiana whipped cream story?
Please. Now when you say Indiana whipped cream, it sounds like that's a euphemism for something that's horrendous, but I'm going to assume it's not.
No, I am literally talking about whipped cream
in Indiana.
In Indiana.
Thank you for clearing that up.
So in Lake Wawasee, Indiana, back in my ne'er-do-well days of my late teens, I would go and water ski with my family. We'd be bored. and it would be raining sometimes. And so one summer, Charlie Sheen came with us to Lake Wawasee, and we went to the local Piggly Wiggly and bought every single whipped cream can that we could get our hands on, and promptly inhaled all the nitrous. So I was watching this to see if Leslie would ever huff the nitrous, but no, she just has the whipped cream.
Little Whippets. By the way, on your Parks and Recollection podcast bingo card, if you had Lake Wawasee, Charlie Sheen, and Whippets, you just got a bingo, because that was a row. That's right.
You're
kicking off the pod really hot with the machine. The machine is in the story. Boy, you guys must have been kids. So he was a kid too, right?
Yeah, he was a kid. He was wanted to be a baseball player, I think, at the time, and we were just young kids, bored, and in those hot Indiana summer nights, like right out of a John Cougar Mellencamp song.
And the closest thing he would be is in Major League as Wild
right.
Thing. So
that's why he could pitch.
He did it in one way. He did it in one way.
That's right.
So many things to talk about in this episode. I kind of want to start with the B story, because I just really, I thought that one was a great physical manifestation of this character and who he was philosophically. So I believe, I don't want to misspeak, but I believe it was originally pitched by Dan Gore, one of the writers, who was like, look, Ron's thing is he's an immovable object. So what if he were literally an immovable object? Like what? Like, he's like, what if he couldn't move? And boy, Nick's I just said boy as if I were from Lake Wawasee. And boy, howdy, isn't his performance amazing? But that maybe your story is rubbing off on me. But yeah, Ron's hernia story is so funny. He's so good in that role.
He's absolutely. It's a comedic tour de force, Ron, in this whole episode. But it's amazing, because even in the first scene where you don't know what's going on with him, it's very
funny,
and he has the talking head, goes, I have a hernia. He's just spectacular in this episode.
Yeah, and it does so many things, right? First of all, obviously it's so in character, and look, this is the second episode of the second season. It's really just the 8th episode of the series, so you're figuring out who these people are. By the way, he's still wearing a suit in this one. Remember we talked about he stops wearing suits at a certain point. He's still wearing a suit. That's how early it is. The scene where he throws the burger at his face to try to eat it's really funny, and it also develops the relationship between Ron and April, which is a really sweet relationship that blossoms over the course of the show. And it's because they have so much in common. They don't want to deal with other people. They don't want to deal they really hate dealing with other people. So that's kind of a commonality they have. And I wanted to shout out this joke that I believe was written by Rachel Axler, who wrote the episode, where Ron says, she's quizzing him about what he has, what's wrong with him, his malady. And he's like, I have a hernia. And she's like, do you have syphilis? He's like, I said I have a hernia. She says, I know, it's possible to have two things. It's like that joke killed me.
The Ron storyline also there's little subtle things in it that made me laugh, like when he's still incapacitated in the parks department at night.
Yes.
And you can't even see his face, and you just hear crickets in the background.
Yes.
Is it that little cricket, like post, in post, like, what if we put crickets in the background?
And they're mixing it a little louder, a little softer. Then the guy coming and buffing the floor and sees him. That's really funny. There's something that was really funny about people coming in after hours, like sort of BG people. We talked about that. Some of that stuff was inspired by In the Writer's Room and We'd Stay Late, which we did a lot more of seasons 1 and 2. Of people coming in and custodians helping clean our offices, and they'd come in while we're working, and they're like, God, what are they thinking about our lives? Because we're just talking about the dumbest shit. Like we're pitching we're pitching sitcom stories, and people are like doing real work around us. But yeah, we always that always came up, right?
Yeah, there's so many great little nuggets in this one. I mean, the whole shovel guitar.
Yes,
thing
absolutely.
is great. I mean, shovel guitar. Who doesn't love shovel guitar?
Shovel guitar. I was watching this episode last night and thinking about how, Aziz says basically she's been playing shovel guitar for an hour, right? She's like, and it's like that indefatigable energy that Amy has. And then today, I 10 minutes before we recorded, I got a text from Polar. I invited her to a party, a birthday party I was having, and she was like, "Oh my God, I can't wait to come to this party! Like, I can't, I haven't seen you so long. Like, let's catch." I was like, "This is the energy. This is the energy in the show, man. That's shovel guitar right there."
Totally.
But I was very excited. Yeah,
her energy is always high. So remind me, one of my favorite things about this is the shovel guitar reference. What is it?
Alan, I think I could take this one. I'm pretty sure that Shovel Guitar was improvised by Amy on set when Amy and Aziz were just riffing together, getting a bunch of great content of hanging out all night in that van.
This is a very high energy episode across the board, I think.
Yes. I wanted to talk a little bit about, I don't know if, you were remembering this / reading about it, but as it was happening, as Tom gets arrested at the end of this episode, it reminded me of this Henry Louis Gates event that happened in 2009. And I realized we basically used that as kind of inspiration for this episode. For those who are uninitiated, there's a professor at Harvard named Henry Louis Gates, and he had gone on a trip to China, and then he returned home. By the way, I love this fact. He was on a trip to China to research the ancestry of Yo-Yo Ma for a TV show called Faces of America. Great detail in this story. Like, I don't know how that's such an intense detail. He comes home to his residence on the Harvard campus. He finds the front door of his home jammed shut. And then, with the help of his driver, is like, well, I got to get home. He tries to force open the front door to his own house. And for anyone out there who's forgotten their key, we've all been in this situation. It's like, God damn, how do I break into my own house, right? It's like, I got to jump the fence. Like, maybe the back door is unlocked. Is there a key in a rock? Like, whatever. A witness sees this and reports the activity to police. The police comes, and Professor Henry Louis Gates is arrested by a Cambridge police officer and charged with disorderly conduct. Later, the charges were dropped, but it was this whole hullabaloo. If you remember, President Obama had them sit down for what he called the beer summit, and they just kind of hashed it all out. So I remember that being the impetus for this episode. And if you remember, Pawnee Zoo, which we talked about last week, was kind of a gay marriage episode. So, man, we were kind of really leaning into these issues and bringing them into the Pawnee world. So that's what I thought of when I saw this episode. I remembered that. I was like, oh, yeah, that's why we kind of started writing this episode. Of course, it became very different, by the time it got shot. But
there's no beer. I remember that great shot of Obama in that little weird courtyard off of the Oval Office, and I think they were drinking like Rolling Rocks. Like drinking the most obscure beer.
I know. Well, think about the discussion about which beer they drink, right? It's like, well, is it going to be a Anheuser-Busch beer? Is it going to be Miller Coors? Is it going to be a microbrew? Like, well, a microbrew might not test well in the heartland. Like, maybe, but Lake Wawasee people, they're not going to like the microbrew. They're going to want an IPA there. So maybe we just do, yeah. It's like, but that was, I remember that. It seemed like a simpler time in retrospect, But man, I don't know about you. Certainly watching this episode post 2020, I was like, man, it deals with, again, not to get too heavy, but police dealing with citizens and racial profiling, and of course this is a much lighter touch on all that stuff, but it does touch on it. And the way, but it totally does, because it's like he's about to arrest Aziz, and Aziz like, what, a brown guy can't get in his own van? It's like that kind of stuff. I was like, man, he's like, oh, there's no stereotypes about brown guys in vans.
I'll tell you what was really jarring.
Yeah,
is when you cut to what's clearly cop dash cam footage.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, I don't want to see this. No, I don't want to see this. I don't want to see it. It's not going to be funny. So I know one thing. It's not going to be funny.
Yes. In 2021, police dash cam footage has different connotations than it did 12 years ago, right? We've all sort of had some of us have had our eyes open. Some of us already had eyes open. But man, that is... And by the way, I also wanted to mention, the episode touches on that, but we still, early on in the episode, have Leslie's casual racism come up again. She's like, you're from Libya, right? I'm like, again? Like, how many times are we going to do this joke? And then he's like, I'm from South Carolina, and my parents are from India. And she doesn't... Leslie is such a good person in so many ways. That joke is so jarring, because to me, it's like, you would never do that today, obviously. I'm surprised we did it then. I'm just
multiple
surprised.
times, it's like...
multiple times.
And Leslie just doubles down on it. It's not like she goes,
say anything.
Right. I'm so
she
sorry.
Doesn't
she goes,
apologize. does.
No. She goes, oh, yeah, Libya, Schmibia, whatever one of those countries is.
They share an office. It's like one of her best friends. She looks out on him every day. It's an Indian man. Anyway, that is, as an Asian American, that is a very, very funny thing in retrospect. Look, I'm not making excuses for it. It was a different time. But there's also, and then there's also Tom's explanation, kind of deep in his character about why he chose the name Tom Haverford. He says in a talking head, my real name is Darwish Sabir Ismail Ghani, and by the way, which is Aziz's cousin's name. So it was very funny for me because we did this talking head, and later I met Darwish. So it's like cousin Darwish is just a guy, and cousin, he has a cousin named Harris, and he used cousin Harris in his stand up, and so it was really funny to meet all these guys who I'd only heard their names, and sort of they're nice guys. They were in their 20s when we were in our 30s, and they were. Yeah, we later cast Cousin Harris in Master of None. Anyway, this is all kind of a digression on there. It touches on racial issues, and I kind of had forgotten that the show was addressing wedge issues in that way, the way it did,
And also his monogram on his shirt is the beginning of the great fashion Tom Haverford that will eventually get us to get Rent-A-Swag.
Rent-A-Swag. Yes, I was trying to put my finger on it because I was like, well, he did Entertainment 720, he did Tom's Bistro, and he also did Rent-A-Swag.
One of my favorite things I have those like super, super, super lightweight down jackets, form-fitting zip down jackets that says very subtly Rent-A-Swag. That was one of our Christmas gifts one year. And when people see that, they lose their shit. Like when like serious hardcore fans see a real Rent-A-Swag jacket, they lose it.
It's where, and I'll one up you on that because I gave my Rent-A-Swag jacket to my mother, who is a high school teacher in Moreno Valley, California. So she teaches at a big, massive public high school. So she would wear that. She's a very petite. Older Asian American lady, and then she would go to her giant public school, which is really diverse, and she would wear this Rent-A-Swag jacket, and they'd be like, Miss Bien, where'd you get that jacket, man? Where'd you get that jacket? It says you're an older lady wearing a jacket that says Rent-A-Swag. Anyway, it was a big hit with her students.
Yeah, it's you can't go wrong. It's like a get out of jail free card with a certain demo for sure.
It was really funny, man. It was really funny.
Yeah, but this is the beginning of Tom being and also Tom name checking a lot of people. I think there's some
yes.
He name checks some peeps in this for sure.
It opens with him pretending to know the names of vegetables and calling them different rappers like Soulja Boy Tellum and Ludacris's and Bone Thugs and Harmoniums, whatever. And what I always found funny about Tom's character and then Aziz in general is he started out as a kind of diminutive Asian American, Indian American comedian from South Carolina, just going on stage talking about what he liked, right? And he liked hip hop, he liked food, he liked clothes, whatever. He liked all this stuff. And over time, as he became more successful, he started becoming those things because he became friends with these guys. Like he went from starting out doing open mics as an NYU student about Jay-Z and Kanye to being in a Jay-Z and Kanye music video. Like, if that's not the American dream, that's pretty wild, right? It's like he went to Madison Square, he played Madison Square Garden, and he once did a stand-up show, and like LeBron James and Dwayne Wade went. It's like, that is really wild, man. That is really wild.
I remember the day he was in the video. I remember the day that video came out, and everybody's like stood around he I guess had an early cut of it on his phone. That was a big deal.
It's the video for Otis off Watch the Throne. And yeah, it's like Jay-Z and Kanye, and they're like dancing around cars. And then every so often, you'll see Aziz in the background just dancing also. You're like, this is just really funny, man. This seems so incongruous. And the little sort of, I was privy to some of this because, I'm good friends with Aziz. So like, when we would spend time with those guys, it was we always had to pinch ourselves and be like, what is happening? Because we do not belong here. But it was fun, it was a fun period in our lives for sure.
Pot brownies.
Yes.
I mean, there's a pot brownies reference. I mean, I feel like that's so old school. There's so many ways to get your pot now. I don't think anybody has to build a brownie around it. I mean, there's right.
Edibles are not my favorite, no, because there's no controlling the dosage, and you always feel like who's baking these pot brownies, right? It's like back in the day, like when you get them, it's like I don't trust the baker of these. Like this person making this was not using science, right? I don't know how much to eat or whatever. Like, just feels like not the best way to do it.
Well, and this is clearly a theme, but my experience with pot brownies, the only time I ever really had them, they were baked by, wait for it, Stakeout star Emilio Esteves.
Great, I love it. This is all coming together, man. It's all coming together. I was either going to be Sheen or Esteves. So
yeah, exactly. He was good at it. He knew what he was doing. I was never a pot guy. Never was. I got super, super paranoid and didn't enjoy it one bit. But it didn't stop me from trying it, going, this time it'll be different.
Yes, it's really not for me, and I tried. You know, when I was younger, I tried. Definitely one time, I also ate some kind of pot brownie. Again, it's that thing where I'm not feeling anything. Maybe I'll have 4 more, right? And then you take 4 more, you eat 4 more. I just remember we started. This is like very of its time, but me and my girlfriend at the time were watching the movie Clerks on like DVD. We put it on. It was like, all right, let's watch Clerks. And then I was like kind of laughing, and I looked at her, and we were kind of laughing, and I looked back, and the movie was over. And it was like, oh man, we're now traveling through space and time. I always feel like weed now is like way too strong too. Like I was at a party like not a few years ago, but Seth Rogen was there, and you may be surprised to know Seth Rogen likes weed.
Yeah,
he likes weed.
I would never thought of it.
Yeah, so like, it was like, yeah, try some of this weed. And I was like, okay. And then of course, it's way too strong. And he's like, yeah, that's Snoop Dogg's weed. I was like, this is too. I'm not in this league of guys. Like, I don't want to do this. Like, this is too crazy, man. This is too crazy.
Producer Greg has an interesting story about your jaunt. Hit us with this one, Greg. It's too good.
I brought an edible with me to a concert at the Greek Theater in LA. It was a Crosby, Stills, and Nash concert. And then I was planning to eat it slowly over the course of the concert, but then they saw it in my bag. They're like, you can't bring food in. So I just downed the whole thing, which was a major mistake. It was my first and only edibles experience, because after the first half of the concert, which was the best concert I had ever been to in my entire life at this point, I got very, very, very high and had a major panic attack. Thought that I stopped breathing because I felt an artery in my neck to see how fast my heartbeat was, but I just felt a random part of my neck instead, and I thought I was no longer had a pulse, and I was taken to the medic, and
oh my God,
I thought I died. And then I woke up in the emergency room.
Oh my God!
And so I was that guy taken away in an ambulance at a concert because of a bad edibles experience.
I once was offered a hit of a joint by Willie Nelson on his tour bus, and I was like, I know I don't like this, and I know it makes me paranoid, and I know this is going to end badly. But it was like a circle of famous people in the bus, and I was like, I can't be like totally not cool. So I fake toked it and still got so fucking high that I couldn't leave the bus for 5 hours.
Now look, almost it feels like everyone has a bad edible story and no one has a great edible story. No one's like, you know what? I had a little bite of the brownie. It was a perfect dosage. I was super fun, had a great time with friends, went home and had a great night's sleep and woke up refreshed the next day. Like, no one has that story. It's just
nobody
like,
has
oh
that.
my God, it was horrible. I woke up in the ER. Like, that's, we should know better, man. We should know better. But by the way, it was very quaint in this episode. It's like, wow, weed. It was like weed, like 13 years ago, weed. Like, this is, or 12 years ago, whatever. Like, it's like it almost felt like we're in the 50s or something. We're watching Reefer Madness, right? It's like, oh my God, we got to find the. They called him the Kingpin. She was calling him the Kingpin. whoever like that's a Daredevil villain. That's a Spider-Man villain. That's not a guy who plants weed. Now it's like your Aunt Ellen plants weed, right? It's like the Kingpin.
And the other thing is, it was all like leaf. It wasn't like there were these just gnarly buds that people were holding up. I'm not even sure it was smokable.
That was like a trip back into a different time for sure.
It was fun to see Pratt do one of his. I mean, he's done so many great stunts in the show, but when he's running from the police and jumps into the pit, that is mental.
That's got to be him too. Like this
for sure.
So we've talked a little bit about Pratt doing his own stunts. He almost always did his own stunts. Not only did his own stunts in the show, he also added stunts that weren't there, right? so like he would be like, what if I also like fall off a 10-story building here? Again, I am not a stunt coordinator. Rob, you can probably chime in here too. You've probably done some stunts and or had people do stunts for you with you, but. Something like that, they put a crash pad down, right? They'll put like a mattress down, and that'll break your fall, and I think that does a lot of the work. But you have to fall the right way, right? Can you illuminate us on illuminate that a little bit?
Well, the thing which makes it so funny and so insane is how hard he sells out. I mean, he's first of all running at full speed, and he gets a ton of air, and then he's gyrating as he's arcing in the air and falling into the pit. So he's falling with he has no regard at all for falling correctly. Zero.
Yes.
He's just selling out. And that's what makes it so funny. It's clearly him.
And this is a large man. Pratt is like 6'5". He's probably pushing 300 in this period of the show, and that's a lot of momentum. That is a cannonball of comedy willingness there. So kudos to him. He also does a lot of physical stuff in the episode that I wrote down that made me laugh. It cuts to Pratt, and he's eating a carrot like a rabbit. It's almost like a cartoon. Like, that's one of the first times you see him, and it's like, this is unbelievably broad, but also really funny. And then later, he gets into the van, and then he starts eating this candy necklace like he's a dog or something. He's just like, I guess his secret is just like impersonating it, but he eats a candy necklace whole, and Leslie's like, there's a string in there. He's like, nah, there wasn't one in this one. It's like, oh my God, this is so funny.
The candy necklaces, God, do they even make those anymore? I love those things. Those things are awesome. The problem was, though, the minute you started eating them, then it was all slimy and sticky and whatnot, but God, they were great.
You're wearing, it seems there's something unsanitary about it to me. It's almost like wearing, like, what other food are we eating that we're also wearing? I feel like I have an issue with that. It's like, I don't want to, it's touching your skin. I don't know, man. How long do you want to wear something before you eat it? I
love those old school candy shops where you get the wax lips.
Yeah.
Or the little Coke bottles that have like just clearly sugar liquid in them that you bite the tops off. I mean, all that. I'm way older than you, Alan, so you probably didn't trick or treat and get this good stuff. You were probably getting, what? Yeah.
They would just send me apps on my phone. No, it's like trick or treat. Here's an app. Here's a candy app. Candy Crush.
That's right.
No, there's ring pops, I guess, other food that you wear, but no one's like no one's eating like a burger hat or something. I don't know what another kind of food you would wear would be, but let's talk about Leslie's dating a little bit, just because this is kind of her transition, further away from Brandanowitz. It's hard for me to say Brandanowitz. It's a tongue twister, but I think part of it was trying to make her character a little bit more confident, a little bit more socially, aware, and I think this was all part of that process. So part of that was pairing her up with new people. So Officer Dave was one, and then Justin, the lawyer, was another down the road. And I think it ends up being good for her character. It's kind of a bridge back from Brandanowitz, and what was kind of a bummer, I think, in some ways, for her character to be hung up on this guy who didn't care about her.
Yeah, definitely gives her some agency and all of that. And I think it was a good arc. It was definitely a really good arc. I mean, you always want to see your heroes' romantic lives.
Yes, and I think there's also something to be said for a certain kind of character. It's nice. I know this sounds so obvious, but it's nice when other characters like your main character, you know what I mean? As opposed to a lead who keeps striking out or is a loser or whatever. I don't know. I want to say loser, but look, it changes the dynamics completely when instead of a character constantly rejecting that character, you have an outside character being in love with her. And that happens over and over again. And so that was kind of one of the fundamental changes in the show, is other characters' attitudes towards Leslie. It's not even as if she changes that much. A lot of it is other characters are respecting what she's doing. So I think that was all part and parcel with that sort of adjustment in the show.
Well, because as you know, this is season 2, episode 2, but we keep forgetting season 1 was only 6 episodes.
Yes.
So this is what?
Episode 8. Yeah. Think about episode 8 of a show, 2 months into a show. If it's running weekly, you're not like, hey, is the show completely figured out? It's like, probably not. You know, you look at episode 8 of Seinfeld, you're like, they're still figuring it out. Elaine's hair is still pretty wild, right? They're like getting different. They're going to wear different clothes pretty soon. Like they figure all that shit out later on, you know?
Yep. This definitely has the feel of some stuff just starting to work.
Yes. And let's also not forget the legendary line, "I was born ready, I'm Ron fucking Swanson." You know, that's a seminal line in that character. Or like that kind of confidence, right?
That's early. That you guys knew that Ron was that kind of a legendary Teddy Roosevelt-ish, like that vibe. I mean, I was surprised that line. I knew that it existed. I was surprised it came so early in the life of the show.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that. I mean, he just feels so much more fully formed here. Again, you know, the sort of season break helped, right? Because keep in mind, although it is episode 8 of the show, we took 3 months off, and then we took 2 months to write the show, or to start to write the season, and we talked about each and every character and how they would change or not change from the first season. So I think it was very clear this one was like, oh shit, you know, like Ron is kind of a superhero. And Leslie makes note of it. She's like, when she's at the police station, she's like, I can have Ron Swanson in here kicking down your door. It's like, oh, is he a superhero now? He's like, yeah, he kind of is, just because of how he acts in the show. So again, Offerman really sells that whole story. He doesn't move an inch, but it's a powerhouse performance.
Truly. I mean, it's comedy gold.
If you look at many sitcoms, and I think this is a comedy that falls in that category, they will become increasingly frantic as the seasons progress, and for a variety of reasons, right? So season 1 is like a little slower. There's room, there's air, there's characters are breathing. This season, there's an A story, B story, there's kind of a C story too, but there still doesn't feel as frantic. Now, if you watch season 6 of this show, it's so fast. It's so fast, and there's sometimes even like a D story. The writers would joke about an H story or like a Z story about, oh man, we got so. And by the end, you know, Jerry and Donna sometimes had their own stories. So sometimes there were so many stories going on. If you think about it, and you have 21 minutes, and you have 3 or more stories, sometimes you're talking about a story that is 3 minutes long or something. It's like, how much are you going to get across in 3 minutes? Unless, you know, you're pulling out a ton of air and you're moving at breakneck speed. And so I tend to like when there's a little bit of room to breathe, and I find it to be sometimes an assault on your senses when something is stretched too thin. You know, it's just too tight and too fast. Then again, a lot of comedy directors will say, obviously faster, funnier, but also there's a certain pace that's good for comedy. So you want to hit the sweet spot, I think. And I think like seasons 2 and 3 of the show were kind of in that zone to me.
Why was there a move to do more storylines?
That's a good question. I think in general, because you have a certain look, at a certain point, it comes down to simple math. It comes down to, let's say you have 6 to 8 main characters. I think in this show there were 6 series regulars. If I'm not, oh no, there was more than that. I mean, and also once we added you and Adam Scott, there were even more. So at a certain point in this show, I think there were something like 8 series regulars, and then Jerry and Donna as well, who became series regulars. So then you're talking 10 characters or something, and you can't. I defy anyone to write an elegant 20-minute story that incorporates 10 characters well, right? Like, are you really gonna like that? That is one intricate plot, and you better make that. But you're essentially writing Ocean's 11 at that point, and it's going to be very difficult to do. So what you do is you split them up, and you split them up. Oh, this is the core of this A story is Leslie and Ron. Okay, so Leslie and Ron are in the A story. Okay, well then the B story. Wow, you know what? This is a great Chris, Ben, Tom story or something. And then sometimes, I'm not even joking. Sometimes it's like, who's left? So it's like, oh, who's left? left? Oh, we got looks like we got April and Jerry and whatever it is, whoever's left. It's like, okay, what are they doing? Right? Sometimes you're thinking about that. You're like, what? And Ann, right? Greg says always Ann. It's not always Ann, but because Ann didn't work in the parks department, often was like, okay, well, how can we fit her into the story? What's the most organic way to get her
she
in?
comes over and has lunch.
There's a lot of, okay, she's holding the paper. She's reading the paper in the courtyard. It's like, man, she's always reading the paper. But it comes, it's a pragmatic issue. And then also, I will say, working on a show right now, a half-hour comedy, it's fun to bounce back and forth between stories. There's something about cross-cutting. I've thought about this a lot, even in dramatic movies. This is a weird example. But if you watch Star Wars, they're cross-cutting, and cross-cutting between stories sometimes gives you a propulsive energy, and it allows you to time cut between stories. It allows you to work with the propulsiveness of the stories in concert. And I know that sounds really pretentious in some ways, and it probably is, but it really, there is a way to make it work in your favor and really have the stories play off each other. And I think at the really highest level, what if they dovetail, or what if they mirror each other thematically? That's always great. That's like, wow. And that's happening in some of these Parks episodes. And I give credit to Mike and about, the elegance of, wow, something I learned in the B story has resonance in the A story, or vice versa. That's high level, and I really like that stuff.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. That's the hallmark of good writing, 100%.
Yes.
Should we do a town howl? When it's getting to Halloween time, they should be called the town howl.
Town howl, and maybe it's a town howl. I believe today, Rob. Well, we'll decide where to. Do you have an idea of where we want to do this town howl?
The town howl.
I was going to say. Go ahead if you have an idea.
No, if it's the town howl, it should be. For sure, in the what's the animal themed area? The animal control floor?
Oh,
animal
sure.
Control
The fourth floor where the animal control, or do you want to just do it at animal control? Let's do it at animal control.
Let's do it at animal control. Town howl.
Yeah. Let's do this town howl at the animal control offices. This is so hard to say, but I'll keep saying it. Town howl. And by the way, it's also a town howl because I believe our current town howl is a voicemail. It is not just an email or a letter or physical snail mail letter. It is a voicemail. Can we play that down, Producer Schulte?
Hi, this is Conrad. My partner and I are both really big fans of Parks and Rec, and we're wondering at what age you think we can appropriately introduce our kids to the show. They're currently 8 months and 3 years old. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Conrad. Great twist. The guy wrote his own joke in his voicemail. And
yes.
the real answer is that it's already too late. You should have started at 1 month. No, no, it's a great question. Great name, by the way. That's my nephew's name, Conrad. So very sweet. Remind me of him. I don't know. What do you think, Rob? We were just talking about how there's swearing and police brutality and weed in this one. But I will say it's usually a pretty family-friendly show.
I think it's so family friendly, and I know I'm stopped all the time by super young kids who are happy to see Chris Traeger, and I'm always blown away at how young some of them are, and I think because the inherent energy of the show and the sort of sunny optimism and overt happiness in it makes it a good fit for kids younger than you might suspect. And then my other thing is, as a parent, here's where I always fell on this subject of when it's appropriate for people. I'd much rather have my kids see great things that are inappropriate for them age-wise than appropriate things for them age-wise that are fucking awful. Yeah. And that's 90% of what kids are watching.
Right. So instead of watching like a poorly made kids show, you're like, here's The Shining.
Exactly. No, I'm not kidding. Yeah, I'm not kidding in the least. Yes.
No, I agree. I agree. I think it can be. I think you can show this to pretty young kids. I just don't think that there's that much bad stuff in it. It aired on broadcast television.
Early,
and I agree
at 8
with
o'clock.
Yeah, early. And I agree with you, Rob. It's appealing to kids, I think, because it's very high energy and it's sort of like you got all these characters and they're learning to get. I know how this is cheesy, but they're learning to get along, and it's a very optimistic show. So.
Yep.
He said his kids were 8 months and 3 or something like that. I mean, fire it up in like a couple years. I would say get them on the train early. As soon as they are sentient human beings who understand language, I think it's fair game, and it's an upbeat show, man. It's good for you. It's nutritious television, I think.
Yeah, I
don't think it's bad.
You go, big comfy couch right into Parks and Rec. That's what you do.
And I think of those sort of that era of NBC comedies, I think it's the most kid friendly. I think it goes like Parks, and then when they're a little older, they can watch maybe The Office, and then Community, and then 30 Rock. I don't know, something in that order. So it's
a whole Thursday night block of comedies.
Yes, basically. It's the Thursday night ladder of getting older. That's
Greg wants to know when they can watch Outsourced. I think that's important.
Greg, your axe to grind against Outsourced, please, man. No, I'm kidding. Outsourced they can watch whenever. Outsourced, whatever. God bless. All right, well, what we really thank you for the question from Conrad. Hey, that's a town. When you start a town, Hal, you don't know where it's gonna end. But it was a fun one, and send in your voicemails, because we always like playing the voicemails and getting the emails as well. So thank you for the questions. I think that's about all we got for this episode. What do you think, Rob?
I got nothing more to give. I think that was. More than enough. But thank you all for listening. And we will be back next week. How fun was that? Hopefully you had as much fun as I did. And if you did, please rate and review the show. That can be your homework if you're so inclined on Apple. Very, very important to the success and ongoing franchise of the show. And please don't forget to join me on Literally, where I talk to I think you'll find very interesting people. Pull that one up and look at that list of guests. And if you can't find somebody that you're interested in, just listen to Alan's episode. He's every bit as interesting as Chris Pratt or Gwyneth Paltrow or Oprah. And come on.
That's right. Thanks, producer Schulte and Greg. Goodbye from Pawnee.
See you later.
This episode of Parks and Recollection is produced by Greg Levine and me, Rob Schulte. Our coordinating producer is Lisa Berm. The podcast is executive produced by Alan Yang for Alan Yang Productions, Rob Lowe for Low Profile, Jeff Ross, Adam Sachs, and Joanna Solotaroff at Team Coco, and Colin Anderson at Stitcher. Gina Batista, Paula Davis, and Britt Kahn are our talent bookers. The theme song is by Mouse Rat, aka Mark Rivers, with additional tracks composed by John Danik. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Parks and Recollection.
This has been a Team Coco production in association with Stitcher.